Well, I saw this Jorgensen 3.0 adjustable clamp at a garage sale for $1, and I couldn't pass it up. So I'm going to rebuild it. It was really all there. It just had a giant crack and a chunk of wood missing out of one part that I thought, because I loved the old patina so much, it was covered with glue and rusty, etc. But it had such a cool patina, I thought I'm just going to try to patch the missing wood rather than rebuild the missing wood. I think the hardest part of this whole thing was getting those little rivets out of the handles. You saw how rusted those handles were. I started with a wire brush to just pretty much expose the rivet so I could find the end of it. Then I got a punch and just worked on it, and I'll tell you, they were really, really stubborn. I had to use a file them flat, but I didn't want to file so deeply that I ruined the ferrule. And I just worked and worked and worked, filing and pounding and filing and pounding, and finally I got those little pins out. And you can see that the handles just thread on. There's a left-hand thread and a right-hand thread, and when you take these things apart, you'll see, and take out those little threaded inserts, you sort of have to remember where everything came from. The best thing is to just have another Jorgensen clamp alongside that you can watch operate, and then mimic that as you put the thing back together, which is exactly what I did. Here I am just trying to buff those ferrules that were so rusty, and with a little bit of sandpaper and a little bit of buffing and a little bit of rouge and more sandpaper later on the lathe as I spun those, I got them down to where they had kind of I brushed maybe a stainless steel look to them. They had kind of a brushed steel look to them, but they looked pretty good. They were nice and shiny. And I replaced the pins in them with some little brass pins I had found in my junk, and just peened those over, and they end up going together pretty good. I started by just turning the handles in my lathe and hoping I could just sand off the old finish, but the finish was stubborn. It had glue all over it. It had just kind of a tough old finish to it. And so, try as I might with this method, it really didn't work out that well. What I ended up doing is painting on lacquer thinner and just scraping the finish off. And the lacquer thinner cut it very quickly. I did the same with the two wood block parts of the clamp. Just kept kind of dousing them down with lacquer thinner, and the finish came right off. Then when it came to sanding them, they sanded very readily because you didn't have the gummy finish clogging up your sandpaper. And you can see I'm getting some nice sanding remnants off of this handle. So I spun them like this in my lathe, sanding them, getting them down. I liked the old patina, so I didn't care about stains in them. I just wanted to get the big chunks out of them and the dried up glue out of them, and kind of get them back to their original shape and sort of a uniformity of look. And the one that spins on with reverse threads wants to back out of the lathe as you put pressure on it. You can see here I just ran some fine paper, that's 400 grit paper, against the steel, and you got kind of a, like I say, sort of a brushed stainless look on the ferrules. Now, as for those little metal inserts, they were rusty. The ends of them were rusty. The barrels themselves were not rusty because they'd been kind of inside the wood their whole life, but the ends were, and so I just buffed those off with sandpaper and then later on my buffer. Here's the biggest problem it had, and what I did is just found another piece of maple, stuck it in there, and poured black epoxy in, and that took a little fussing over and over again. Finally got that filled level, sanded it smooth, and I don't know, I don't mind that repair at all. It's good and strong, and it's a very functional clamp considering I have a whole $1 in it. Now I just sanded the mating surfaces so that they would in a way meet each other in a flat way. I kept comparing the flatness to just the top of my table saw, and held a straight edge up to them now and then. Got them fairly straight. Put a little bit of mineral oil and beeswax finish on the handles, and also paste wax. I put it on. I tend to put paste wax on with steel wool, so you get a little bit of a smoothing action when you're rubbing that on. Gave those all a good buff, and again, I've maintained the cool looking old time patina, yet I end up with a very functional little clamp to kind of go in my collections of little clamps. And there it is with his big brother, the big Ferguson. Again, when you're putting that thing back together, the key to that is to get your directions right of the threads, and then you can see where the left-hand thread and the right-hand thread meet on those threaded shafts. As you're putting it together initially, if you center that in the clamp between the two halves, when you end up drawing it together, it draws together equally, the handles stick out equally, and you get a pretty decent operating clamp. Hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, please subscribe, and thank you for watching. Nice little clamp for $1.